Greetings, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon. We have folks from all over the place today, so whatever time of day it is, welcome here today to the session. So we're going to be talking about collaborative data analysis today. This is really one of my favorite topics to talk about with MAXQDA. This is how I got my start, really using the software and really digging into this sort of in a professional capacity. I'm curious, we've got some great introductions from people joining from all over the world. That's so cool to see. If you can throw in the chat, just curious to see if you've ever done collaborative analysis, if you've worked either with a partner or if you've worked in a group. It'd be interesting to see just to get kind of an informal survey of the group. So we've already got a mixture, no tons. So we've got some different mixtures so far. Some people will be doing some soon. Good. This is excellent. You can throw those in the chat. I'm just kind of curious to see what experience folks have with this topic. So let's dig into things here. To not to expand too much on this introduction, again, just my name's Joel Drevlo. I am a certified trainer. I do have a consulting company that I run, IQDAS Consulting, do freelance research as well as trainings like this one today in consultation with folks on their projects. A lot of graduate students, a lot of professional researchers sort of looking at how they can integrate MAXQDA with their work. My background a little bit, just so you know where I'm kind of coming from, sort of what my style of research is. I started my career as a program evaluator. So I worked at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. I saw that we had a couple of folks here that were joining from Wisconsin. So maybe we've got a few Badgers on the call today. But we were doing a lot of program evaluation and we did it in a collaborative environment. So we would have lots of educators from across the state that would be coming together with their data to analyze it, to see what kind of reach they were making in the community, what audiences were they getting to, where could we expand that, where were we doing well, where could we improve, those kinds of things. So MaxQDA really is a versatile software in that respect, that it can be used in sort of many different types of research and in many different applications. Collaborative analysis is one of, like I said, something I've done quite a bit of in my career, and it's something I'm happy to talk with you about today. I'm joining you from the Boston area, so East Coast of the United States. It's a gorgeous fall day here, so hopefully the weather is cooperating as nicely for you as it is me. If you would like to get in touch with me after today's session, you can find me here, joel.drevlo@iqdas.com. I'd love to hear from you, feedback on the session, questions, anything that you have from me. Would be happy to hear from you after today's session. So let's go through our outline today. What kind of things do I want to cover in the next about 25 minutes or so? First of all, why analyze collaboratively? So, some of you have already done this, so you already have a little bit of experience with this. Some of you have not. Maybe some of you are curious about what the prospects of this is. And so we're going to talk about that a little bit, just kind of some of the high points there. I want to make a distinction here between project management and data analysis. So when we talk about collaborative analysis, we can really kind of break it into these two categories, because there are sort of the more boring parts in project management. I say boring, I actually kind of like it. Maybe I'm a nerd in that respect, but it's kind of nice. I find it kind of stimulating to think about those things. How do you plan out this project? How do you decide what happens first? Sort of how do we get this to the finish line, so to speak, versus the actual data analysis piece. And they commingle from time to time, but in a lot of ways they're separate. So we'll talk about those two things and how they were applied to collaborative analysis. I am going to give you a demonstration of some specific tools that you can use in MaxQDA that I found in my own experience are helpful to help you maintain organization as you get going with these projects. So that is what we will be looking at today. So let's jump right into this first topic, why analyze collaboratively. There's a lot of different sort of aspects to this. So a lot of different reasons why we might do this. A multiplicity of perspective, styles, and expertise. I think this is sort of the very logical rationale for this. We talk about, I think, coming up in the AI discussion yesterday in Stefan's keynote was a little bit of the idea of bias and things like that in AI. Collaborative analysis can be a helpful way to mitigate some of that. I don't necessarily approach it from the bias perspective, but more in that there are things that you miss. Just like when you use the AI to suggest codes or do those kinds of things, it will see things that you don't. In collaborative analysis, it's the same way, and that comes from a lot of reasons. the education background that people have, the books that they've read, the books they're reading right now, um, sort of where they're coming from just as an individual, how they've gotten to this point in time is going to offer a different perspective. They're going to see things differently than you. And that can really enhance the product that you create from your research, make it more readable, make it more applicable to people, and just make it more interesting, I think. Styles, a lot of people have different styles to research. I love doing this when I do collaborative analysis to pay attention to how people write. Um, do they use keywords? Do they write in full sentences, phrases? How do they write about things? How do they annotate codes? I think these are some interesting pieces. And expertise. If you are working on a very theory-driven project and you have someone who is an expert in the field, this is a very valuable resource. And so the ability to leverage that can be super helpful in these projects. From a very practical standpoint, enables intercoder reliability checks. So you're able to actually check the code system. I don't view intercoder reliability as the same way as like a confidence interval or some type of p-value. I don't see it that way, but there is an aspect of consistency there that's more of, I mean, you can, depending on the code checks that you run, you do get statistics. But the idea here is that it's a check of the sort of the consistency of your code system. Are people applying it in the same way? I view it more rather from like an objective agreement, more from the actual application. How are you actually applying the code? How are people actually doing the work? A division of labor, this is a popular one. I think, unfortunately, the deadlines move so fast and we find ourselves so busy that a lot of people want to divide labor. I tend to try and avoid this idea of efficiency. Efficiency may be implied, but it's not guaranteed. I've seen a lot of instances where people divide labor too soon and they create more work for themselves. So be careful with that. It's not always a path to success. Sometimes it can throw up roadblocks along the way. But division of labor is a real thing here, and it's a real consideration for us when you have limited time and resources. The one that I really find is ideal training environment. This is such a great way to train students, to train new researchers, to train a team, and really to train yourself as a project manager. I find this idea of mindfulness and sort of everything that we do, regardless of your experience level in this case, can be a really helpful piece. So I think collaborative analysis can be a great way to train because it's hands-on. I was actually doing some, as an aside, I was doing some yoga this morning, and the instructor was saying that it's not something that you learn, it's not theory driven, it's something that you do, right? You have to actually get on the mat and do the pose. You can't just look at a picture in the book. So there, some of that applies here in this research environment, that you have to actually get in and do the work. And it's fun. I think it's fun. It's so much more fun to do this with a group, to have feedback from other people, to bat ideas around, to have a discussion. And so these are some of the reasons, some of the rationale why we might do this. If you're wondering about, why do I want to take on maybe this extra work? Now, there's planning involved, but I think there are some rewards that you can be given from this. So let's talk a little bit about this idea of project management versus data analysis. So when we're talking about managing the project, I think it's important to have clear distinctions. Clear distinctions really in roles. So there needs to be, and this is from a very practical functional standpoint, and just how MAXQDA functions in merging teamwork back and forth. You need a project manager. Someone has to be responsible for physically merging the files. And so you need that designation as a project manager. Usually that's a team lead, we'll call that. If you use Team Cloud, that's the terminology that they'll use, team lead and team member. And they have different capabilities. They have different sort of powers in MAXQDA. So team assignments are important. We need to know if we're going to be doing, if we're coding in dyads or triads, who's going to code what, what's their responsibility, what are those due dates, when does work have to be completed. Don't be fuzzy with this stuff, because the more explicit you are, the easier that it is for people. You have to think there's a lot of sort of cognitive load, I guess, if we want to use some technical terms, but it's a lot of brain power that it takes to do this analysis, and especially if you're new to this. So the less or the more that you can make explicit, the less people have to think about that as they do their work. So be explicit with those things. What are the team assignments? What are the due dates? What are the expectations? Things like recurring data import. This is going to change depending on your project. If you've collected all of your data, That's one thing. If you're in the midst of doing some analysis, collecting data, doing some analysis, which I find to be kind of an ideal way to do this work, you need to be documenting this in your project file so you can keep track of those things. And I'm going to show you some specific tools that you can use to do these kinds of things as we get going. Now, where it gets murky, the project management versus data analysis, is really with the code system. That's where I have seen in consulting with folks and working functional support and answering questions, this is where I have seen the most breakdown, developing the code system. And this comes to the division of labor, where we divide labor before the code system is in place and before our teams are confident in what this code system means. And that is not good. It just causes more trouble for you, and it makes you it makes the work sort of more difficult for the teams, and it makes us sometimes less sure of the results that we have. So make sure that we have our code system set before we start to move on to those pieces. Memo writing can also be tricky just from a functional standpoint. Both the code system and the memo writing, in MAXQDA, it's oftentimes going to ask you to pick winners. So you're going to have to look between two people coded a segment. One is longer than the other. Which one do you take? Or two people have written memos. Which one do you take? So there's some project management in this that you have to consider that meshes with the data analysis. So in a lot of ways, they're separate sort of spheres. In some ways, they do commingle, and so you have to be aware of that. But it's especially prominent here in sort of when you're developing the code system and when you are writing memos. All right, so how do we stay organized? A couple of things here, of course, project file management, right? What kind of steps can we take to make sure that our project files are clear as we go through moving back and forth between projects? When we're looking, there are some sort of specific things here with the document system and the code system. I want to take you through, I've made kind of just a flow chart here that I want to kind of give you a look at. And it looks like that is sharing on the screen. I made this in Lucidchart so you can kind of take a look at this. So actually, this is not the one. This is the one I wanted. Yep. All right. So when we look at sort of this is from more of a global perspective. And so I want to just talk about this a little bit before I jump into some of the specific features that we can use to kind of keep ourselves organized. So the starting point for this decision tree assumes initial project management work has been completed. So essentially, you've created a project file, you've imported documents, right? We're starting at that level. So we begin by this idea of, have you developed an initial coding system and coding rules? So it's not enough to define just the definitions of the codes, but there needs to be rules, especially if you want to run intercoder checks. Do you code the whole paragraph? Do you code the whole sentence? Right? What's your breakdown here? If you want to run in MAXQDA as the intercoder check, you have options to check between, does it exist or not? Does it exist within sort of the same area or the same number of times? And then does it exist in the exact same segment, right? Being the most precise, that's going to give you the best indicator. So you'll want to have specific rules so that you can decide, you can be consistent sort of in your coding. And when you go to evaluate that, you've got more sort of applicable results. So if you develop that initial code system, if the answer to that is yes, then you want to consider, have you jointly coded any data? So collaborative analysis, you can create that code system, but don't just go ahead and just let people go off and do their own thing. You need to work together. Coding together allows you to have those discussions, allows you to have those talking points. It allows you to diagnose a lot of this stuff where you're able to get more comfortable with the code system. And then when you break up that work, it's a lot easier for folks to understand. So if the answer to that is no, then you need to do some co-analysis. So you actually need to get together in a room or on a call and do some analysis. And it can be helpful here just as a practical standpoint. If you're working with new users, give them a chance to run the software, to actually do the coding, do the annotating, for two reasons. One, just the physical manipulation of the software is something you need to learn. And two, it helps to incorporate more people's voices, because ultimately the length of the coded segment, the annotation that's created, the color that's used, that's a reflection of the coder. and their voice, their perspective, all those things. And so the more people we can involve in that process, the sort of broader our analysis is. If it's the same person writing the analysis, writing the notes or the annotations every time, they get to sort of dominate the conversation. So be aware of that. So once you've done some co-analysis, have you tested your code system? This is where we get to the actual idea of intercoder checks. Now you can run an actual intercoder check in this. You don't necessarily need to do that. It can be more of an informal check. You can use, for example, a code relations browser or something like that, or a code matrix browser to sort of get an informal check of those kinds of things. And you can then discuss those. And so that can be a helpful piece. So this is where you revise the code system. This is where codes condense. This is where definitions expand. This is where you include anchor examples in your code memos. This is where you make rules for border cases, when to do something, when not to do something. It seems strange, but those examples of when not to use this code can sometimes be more powerful in defining it than the positive examples. So play around with that, including those kinds of things in your code system. And those code memos should be developing over time through these discussions, and you should be capturing as much of that there as you can. All right, so now once we've gotten through all of this, we've done some co-analysis, we've tested our code system, we revised our code system. Now we are ready to effectively divide labor. So it's possible you could divide labor right at the beginning of your project, and it might work for you, right? If you're a team that's worked together, you have a sense of each other, it could work, right? That's typically not the case, and I will just say that from experience, having done this kind of work and consulted with people who have had issues with this. Take the time in the early stages to get on the same page, because that investment at the beginning will make it so much easier towards the end, right? So again, this idea here, the steps outlined here will place you and your team on firm footing to analyze independently, but you may continue co-analysis if preferred. Sometimes it's easier just to schedule an hour or two on the call, get together and code. It can be simpler sometimes to just knock it out together. Now, I understand we don't all have that time. We're busy, and so if you need to break that apart, it's an understandable aspect. Some of the specific functions that you can look at here. So this is shared in your handout. If you want to see this one, it's available to you in the Zoom menus here. The idea here is, do you need to work simultaneously? This is sort of there's kind of different ways that you can approach this. You can, for example, when you divide labor, you can have a single project file. I do my work, I pass you the project file, you do your work, you pass it back, I do my work, and we can go back and forth with that. That is the easiest, simplest, most straightforward way to do this. But it takes time, because I have to wait for you to finish before I can do the next part. So if you need to work simultaneously, this is where the project management comes in, because you have two copies of this file, and at some point you'll need to bring them back together. And so you need to be aware of what's going on, right? So the idea, how many people are in your team? I usually say if you've got 2 people in your team, you really don't need Team Cloud for that. You can use the manual features. If you have more than that, you should consider using Team Cloud. So usually at about 3+, because you'll have to, in the merge process, you'll have to merge A plus B, then A, B plus C. And if you have more, then you keep repeating that process. It gets to be tedious for the project manager. So Team Cloud can be helpful there. Also, if you're working with large data like video or audio files, the Team Cloud can be helpful, because it's sharing that data becomes much easier because it's stored in our servers. They download a copy of the file and they have everything right away. So those are 2 considerations for Team Cloud. One thing you should know for any students in the room, Team Cloud is not available on a student license. Okay, so you need to have an academic license, or just an individual license. It's not available for student users. So be aware of that. The manual teamwork features are available for students, but not Team Cloud. So typically then when you work, you divide this labor. Do you divide via codes or documents, right? So I need to have some way to separate my work. Am I going to have you do codes 1 through 5 and I do 6 through 10? Or am I going to have you do documents 1 through 5 and me 6 through 10? I would say most people are using documents. That's usually the simplest way to do this. However, earlier we talked about why do collaborative analysis? If you have experts, right, and you have a code system that is based off of either their own research or something that they're an expert in, you might want them to do that coding, right? Because it makes more sense to them. They have more experience in that background, and you do another aspect of the coding. It really depends. There's no right or wrong way to do this. I would say from a functional standpoint, doing it via documents is simpler. But from a sort of conceptual standpoint, either way will work as long as you have a consistent plan. So essentially, this is a cycle, right? So I bring in my work, I do my analysis, I get to a point, I reevaluate. Do I need to keep doing work? Okay, then I do another cycle, and I do another cycle. And it's either I'm adding data in, or I'm adding new codes, or I'm reevaluating codes. And you basically just keep running these cycles until you get to a point where your analysis is complete. Now, if you've ever read any quantitative paper, that the analysis is rarely complete. The findings are usually this requires further analysis, but you get the picture. You get to a product that's created, that's generated from this. And so what I want to do now is jump into some of the specific pieces. So we've got about 8 to 10 minutes here. I want to show you some of the specific functions that you can use here. So hopefully this lays out some of the framework for you in a sense of sort of how you want to plan this and how you want to think about this as you get to plan your project. All right, so let's look at a few things here about staying organized. First of all, project file management. You need to have consistent rules with this. One of the easier ways, if you are going to be merging project files, or if you're going to be using the teamwork options, which is, I would say, most common, you're working with exchange files. So you actually create an exchange file based off of certain elements, certain documents, and certain codes. You pass that work over, and then your partner will merge that work into their project file. They already have the raw data, they have the raw text, and they're just applying your work to the text, right? Your coding, your annotations, your memos, anything that you've added will be then applied to the text. And now you all have it in the same file. You copy that file again, another cycle, and you keep going that way until you're done. So with project file management, it's helpful to consider your naming conventions. So including the date, right? Including the date when you got the file or when the work was done, including your initials as an analyst so that people know this is your file and it was done on this date. And it's helpful to keep an archive system. So I've had good luck working in Teams, like Microsoft Teams, to maintain an archive and to pass files because it's cloud-based. Now, one thing that you need to be clear on here, don't work directly from a cloud source. Make sure you download the file to your computer first, so as you're sharing files back and forth. Teams is nice about this because Teams won't allow you to open because there's no application that will be found. So it will download it and then you'll open it. That's why I make the pitch there. I get no money from Microsoft. So project file management, that's an important consideration here. To keep an archive as well. Anytime you make big changes, you should save copies, right? If you're going to do a big overhaul to your code system, if you're going to add a whole new slate of data, you should have a copy made so that if something goes awry, you can always get back to where you were. So some specific things to stay organized in your document system. So the document system is this window up here. Obviously, these memos are super huge. At the top of your document system is this memo. This is called the project memo. The project memo is a global memo. It applies to the entire project. So this is a great place as a project manager to place deadlines, to place research questions, analysis questions, team assignments, due dates, if I didn't say that. There's some helpful things that you can use in here. For example, you can highlight things for specific teams. You can use specific fonts for specific teams. Color coding can be helpful as well. But it's really helpful to always have those research questions and analysis questions here, right? That way I don't have to go dig through a chat or a Zoom log or an email chain to find what our research questions were. It's here. The idea that if you take anything away from this, everything possible should be contained in your MAXQDA project file. The more that's contained here, the less people have to go to outside sources to recall things, right? So Those conversations, try to keep as much of them in here, or at least the high points in here as you can. So the project memo is a great thing to contain those. Recently, in one of the recent updates, MAXQDA added a code system memo. And so earlier we talked about protocols, right? Okay, how much do you code? Do you code a sentence? Do you code a paragraph? Does it require a comment? Um, this is a good question, what to do when you're unsure. Whenever I create a code system, I almost always have at the very top of my code system an unsure code. That way, if something appears in the text that I recognize as important, but I don't know where to put it yet, it goes in unsure. These are great places to promote discussion. So when you've divided your labor, right, and you're coding, you find a place that's unsure, categorize all those sections of text, all those coded segments there. Then when you go to do your debrief, you have 20, 30 coded segments that you now can discuss, and you can place them in their appropriate code. And that is really helpful for everybody getting on the same page about what does this code system mean? How is it applied? How do we interpret it? How to comment, right? What's your protocols here? Are keywords enough? Do I need full sentences? I'm going to say full sentences. You never remember keywords. At least I don't. My memory sucks. And social media, I think, has fried my brain in that respect, that it's difficult for me to remember that stuff. So make full sentences. It's a lot easier when you come back to this project 2 days later to remember sort of what it was you're thinking about. But the code system memo is a great place to keep instructions about how you code, what to do when you're unsure, right? Those kinds of things. Document sets can be a great tool here. If it's possible, you can obviously arrange interviews in document groups. So I might have, instead of Berlin, this might be John and this might be Jill, right? I have 2 people here assigned, but you can do that with sets as well. So it's as simple as activating these 5 documents, right? Right-clicking in my sets, making a new set, and I'll say coding work for Bill, right? And now I know these 5 documents are his responsibility. And on this set, I can create a memo, right? I can include the due date, right? I can include the other team members that might be here, right? And then those kinds of things. So it's a good way to stay organized. That way, again, they don't have to go back to some kind of email chain or something like that to get help. They have it right here. Another thing that can be helpful for doing this kind of work is changing document color. So let's say goldenrod is the default color. I've analyzed Mateo's interview. I'm going to change that color to green. I know it's done now. And then everything else, let's say I had a question on Salim's interview. I'm going to color this red, right? This is going to indicate we need to discuss this. There's something here I didn't understand. Now I can go up to activate by color. I can select my red documents, right? And I can filter my data set, and you'll see I have just this one document available to me. So this is a nice way to, again, promote discussion and allow people to look at things that they want to discuss later. So document groups, document sets, document colors, memos, these are really helpful ways to stay organized. In the code system, we already talked about this unsure code at the top. This is a really good way to stay organized. Your code system memo. The code memos obviously should be thorough, right? The code definitions, examples, anchor examples, links to specific things in the text can be really helpful. The other piece that I find helpful in arranging a code system is to actually put in the specific order. Right. So for example, when I was doing program evaluation, one of the first things we always looked for was audience. We were looking at programming that was directed towards certain audiences across the state: farmers, students, business owners, indigenous populations, whatever it may be. And so one of the very first things that when you were reading something that you coded for was the audience. Who is this intended to reach? And so this would be number 1, and you can even label it in those steps, right? This is step 1. The first thing you do is you code for the audience. The second thing you do is you code for the type of activity, right? Is it a workshop? Is it answering a phone call? Is it X, Y, or Z, right? And so actually structuring these things sort of in a progressing order of easy to identify to more subjective, right, can be helpful. Those small wins, this sounds strange, but these small wins that you kind of build up as a coder are helpful. If you're getting stumped every single time you go to code a piece of text, that's demoralizing. You don't want to keep doing that work. So building in sort of a progressive code system where you start from maybe simpler things to identify to more difficult things can help you keep going, right? Can help motivate people to keep doing this work. Because if you're struggling with everything that you do, it can be kind of defeating. And this is tiring work. I don't know if you've ever coded for several hours at a time, but it's exhausting. You kind of feel just drained afterwards. So those are a few of the things, the sort of the practical considerations I would talk about if you are looking to do this work and sort of staying organized. There is on MAXQDA Press, there is a bunch of books about doing collaborative analysis in teams. I have a chapter with a colleague of mine, Christian Schmieder, and I wrote a chapter about doing this with our work at UW-Madison you can check out. But there's some excellent resources that will go into much more detail and lay this out sort of from a very functional standpoint. I encourage you to check those out if you're looking for sort of a nice handbook to go along with it. And all those resources are free. So definitely check those out. But I'm right at 33 minutes here, so I want to leave the last 12 minutes here for questions that folks may have. All right. So the first question I've got here, is it possible to work collaboratively with MAXQDA Analytics Pro student license? Yeah, that one I talked about. Can't use this as a student license. You will need to have a regular academic license for this, or whatever, anything other than a student license. If it's business, academics, nonprofit, whatever. Can I share the file with limited access so privacy is maintained? Yes, there are. Let's see. Those are under is it under the analysis options? I can never remember where that one is. So the anonymized project, this would allow you to change names and things like that. It's under teamwork. Activate user management. User management will allow you to maintain certain things. You can password protect the file. You can limit access to certain things there. So you can definitely check that out. The user access, activate user access management. Check that out in the manual. There's a good description on what exactly you can do there and how you do it. But this would probably be your best, and so that you can maintain. People can only work in certain parts of the file. When would you use comments versus paraphrase versus code memos? Great question. It has to do with where you want the annotation to be. There is, I'll address this briefly, but there's an excellent blog post Stefan Radiker has written in the MAXQDA blog about this that you should really read. But the idea here, paraphrases is a timing thing. Paraphrases are usually done early when you're forming a code system. So you paraphrase text because it's more open. And then from the paraphrases, you generate the code, right? So it's a very systematic process. Now, you can do that for a whole project. There's methodology that's written around this. I usually say do this in the beginning stages, right? Then you're generating your code from the text, so to speak. Comments and memos, the difference is the location. So let's see this one here as a comment, right? This comment is attached directly to this piece of text. So if I move this around in MAXQDA, if I look at it in my segment matrix viewer, I can see those annotations. Memos don't follow quite as closely. Also, comments are shorter, 511 characters for a code comment. Memos are unlimited. You can write as much text as you want. So the location is different, and then also the length of your exposition is different. A comment is shorter, pithy is a great word, and a memo is meant to be more expository. You get more space to write. Hopefully that answers your question. How do 2 to 3 researchers work in the same project? Okay, so if you want to work in the same project, it's not like Google Docs, unfortunately. You can screen share. If you're going to work at the same time, you screen share, one person drives, and the other two speak. And there's sort of an unwritten agreement here. The person driving is focusing on the functional. right? They're coding, they're writing. The other two, they are responsible for the brain power. Okay. And so that's why you want to trade. I'll drive for the first hour, you drive for the second hour. And then that way, both of our voices get incorporated in the project, and it's fair, right? It's kind of running the work. It's stressful sometimes because you're trying to people are talking, and you're trying to capture what they're discussing in your notes. Um, Maybe I just have more anxiety than other people, um, but if you want to divide the labor and work simultaneously, you'll have copies. I have a copy, you have a copy. I work in documents 1 through 5, you work in 6 through 10, and then we merge the work at the end, right? And so it's more of like if you're familiar with like Git, like a repository, it's more of that process, where I'm drawing a blank on what's that called, what that is called, but it functions more like that. Okay, so I've been using the merge projects button when it looks like I should have been using the teamwork button. Could you demonstrate how to use the teamwork button? Yeah, I can do that quick. So export teamwork to an Exchange file. Let's say I did work on, um, I want to export this work from these 5 documents. I can activate these 5, and now I can right click, um, or on this folder here, I can right click. I can export this now to an Exchange file. It's going to ask me what codes. Typically, you'll use all the codes, unless you've divided your labor by codes. You click next. This will make an Exchange file. Let's just save this on my desktop. And this will create an Exchange file, and it will have the extension MEX instead of MX. Then I would go to my teamwork options, and I would now import my Exchange file, right? And I'll open up my file browser. I will go to my desktop, and you'll see MEX, right? I open this, and MAXQDA is going to prompt me to decide where I want to put these. So the target here is Mateo interviews Mateo, right? So I can see it's based off of the name. So the names need to be consistent across this. So don't go changing document names, and don't go changing code names. This is why we have the step of physical collaborative analysis where you're in the room together, changing the code together before you divide labor. Because if you divide the labor and then I change the names to the code, now MAXQDA doesn't know where to put the code, and it's going to just duplicate everything. It's going to give you the original codes plus my changed code names in the same code system, and it's a mess, right? And so this is why we want to be sort of consistent about how we plan this work. I would follow along with this. It'll add in my code names. Again, here's why the code names need to stay consistent. New codes would be displayed in green, so you need to maintain consistency here. And this is where it's going to ask you how you want to import, right? Who's going to win essentially when there's conflicts, right? And you would click import, and that would bring in the work. There are explicit demonstrations of this on YouTube. There's a whole manual entry where you can check this out in more detail, but that's kind of the basic gist of it. You would select the elements that you want, create an Exchange file via the export, go to the target file, and import that work. Okay, you can practice that if you want in the Exchange file. You can just export this document as a blank document and export the work over. So it's kind of helpful sometimes to practice. I would say if you're new to this, start small. Don't jump into this with a huge project first. It's going to fail. I've seen that happen too many times. Okay, due to the nature of my work, I cannot use the cloud. Yeah, I understand that. And then you're just going to want to use the manual features. That makes sense. The team cloud necessitates that you have to store it in our servers so that we can facilitate sort of the exchange across. So I understand that sometimes people are working with sensitive data. Is there a way to highlight segment sizes, segments to code before a second coder does a control coding round so that they only have to select the codes but not define the segment length? Yeah, you would just have to do the pre-work. You could highlight it. You could just code it with sort of a dummy code. I've actually consulted with people who have done it that way, where they've done the pre-coding essentially, where they code the chunk of text. They were working with long-form interviews, and they would code the chunk of text that they wanted analyzed. And then they asked a round of coders to apply a code to that. So yeah, you would essentially just highlight it in some way, use the highlighter function right here in your document browser. You could use this, or you could just code it with some kind of dummy code, right? That doesn't have any kind of meaning. It's just a structural code. It just serves a function or a purpose. Um, be careful with that. I guess it slightly, that that kind of eliminates a little bit of the sort of choice from the matter. You're sort of predisposing people towards certain things. So, not that that's bad, but just make sure that you're transparent with that, that you explain that in the process that you're explaining to your reading audience. Is it possible to work to a sharing document, same document at the same time? No, it's not. Don't do that. MAXQDA is database software. If you, for example, save a file to Dropbox and you both open it at the same time, it will cause problems. So don't do that. You cannot have two people in the same file at the same time. The thing is, MAXQDA is always saving in the background. Every time you add a code, every time you code a segment, write something, it's saving. And if you're doing that at the same time, it gets off in sequence, and then you have weird things happen to your project file. So don't do that. It's a versioning. I remembered the word. It's a versioning system. You have copies of the file and you merge them. That's the way that this teamwork process works. I'm sure the developers are trying to figure out a way to make that work, because it's something that gets requested a ton. I think it's just it's a very difficult thing to do with the software. How does MAXQDA integrate AI to help with the coding process? Yeah, there's lots of functions on that. There's some. I would have you check out some of the specific spotlight sessions on AI to get more of a read on that. I'm going to show a little bit of the AI stuff with focus group analysis today if you want to see some of that. But in general, there are options in specific places. So you have specific AI assist options in your document browser. So if I highlight and right click, I get a list of options. If I highlight in my document system, I get a list of options. If I highlight in my code system, I get a list of options. So I would explore those there. This what is AI assist as well. We'll explain some of that to you. Someone says, yes, I experienced the duplication. Yeah, so if you change code names or something like that mid analysis, and that's a thing to do, and there are ways to mitigate that. There's some workarounds that are kind of talked about in that book I was telling you about, MAXQDA Press, where you basically designate codes under users, right? So I would create at the top of my code system coder 1, and then I would have coder 2, right? And so if I'm in the sort of developmental stage, this would allow me to, if I'm reading this and I see something here that's a new code, new idea, not yet covered, right? I can put this is under my code system. So now this isn't going to screw up the rest of the code system. And so you can kind of cover a little bit of that here, but the project manager still is going to have to integrate this later, right? So just be aware of that there's still a step there in sort of that manual process. Could you briefly explain the difference between import and merge functions under the teamwork tab? Yeah, so merge, in a very broad way, merge would mean I have a single project file with documents A, B, and C, right? Unique documents. You have a project file with documents D, E, and F, unique documents. They share the same code system, right? But they have unique documents. When I merge, I can pull all that work together, and now it puts the two project files together. Teamwork would mean there's a single project file that has A, B, C, D, E, and F in the project file. But I have, through my project management, told you, you're A, B, C, I'm D, E, F, and we have copies, and I work just in mine, and you work just in yours, and you share an exchange file that passes just your work. It doesn't pass the raw text. It passes just your work. So your coding work, your memos, your annotations. Hopefully that kind of makes sense. That it has to do with whether you're working in a copy or whether you're working with duplicated unique files. All right, I think that's all the questions, and we're right here at 11:01. So I'm only a minute over. I'm happy with that. This was fun. These were really good questions, and I really do encourage you to try out collaborative analysis. It's super fun. It's a good way to learn. It's a good way to train. Um, and it's just a fun way to sort of see how this process works. So if you have other questions that didn't get answered today, please reach out via the Zoom platform or email, whatever. Happy to chat with you, and enjoy the rest of the conference and have a great rest of the day, everybody.